200 men had tried to move him. One visitor finished it in 6 seconds. The place was a temple courtyard in Kyoto on October 3, 1968, just after 4:18 in the afternoon, and the challenge had already outlived 15 cities, 200 challengers, and every guess the crowd thought was sensible. No one had lasted more than 4.7 seconds once the champion decided to touch them. Bruce Lee was not there as a fighter. He was a 138-pound man in a dark civilian jacket, standing near the incense basin, reading the wooden donor names as if he had nowhere else to be. What happened next took 6 seconds. The temple spoke about it for 31 years. November 3, 1968. Kyoto. 4:18 in the afternoon. The temple sat halfway up a stone incline above the city, where the air turned cooler by 2 degrees and carried a different set of smells than the streets below. Down in the traffic, the scent was engine oil, wet pavement, and roasted chestnuts from a cart outside Shijo Station. Up here, it was cedar wood darkened by age, incense ash, old paper, and the faint mineral smell of rain still trapped inside. The stone steps from the morning shower. The sky held a pale silver light. Not sunset. Earlier than that. The kind of cold light that flattens distance and makes every roof tile look sharper. The courtyard stones were still damp in the cracks. You could see it where the light caught them. Thin seams of moisture between gray slabs cut by hundreds of years of sandals and winter frost. Each footstep answered differently. The priests in split-toe shoes made almost no sound. Tourists did. Rubber soles clicked and dragged. A child coughed near the outer gate. Somewhere behind the main hall, a bronze bell gave off one low, patient strike that seemed to stay in the air longer than it should have. A line of shoes waited outside a side chamber in careful pairs. Brown leather, black loafers, one pair of white practice slippers too large for the feet that would later wear them. The paper screens were partly open. Through them came the dry sound of fabric shifting, then stopping, then shifting again. Not conversation, preparation, measured, repeated. The courtyard itself was orderly, but the order felt tightened, as if the place had been adjusted for an event no sign announced. Near the incense basin, smoke rose in narrow blue-gray threads, and then flattened beneath the cold air. It carried a bitter sweetness. Sandalwood mostly, with something older beneath it, the smell of burned lacquer and old altars rubbed smooth by hands that no one remembered anymore. When the wind changed, you could taste the ash, fine on the back of the tongue. Monks passed through it without looking. Visitors slowed down. Several stayed longer than prayer required. The city continued below with complete indifference. Streetcars rang. A delivery truck changed gears too hard. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and stopped. Inside the temple grounds, that outside, life reached the courtyard softened but unbroken, which is to say the silence here was never pure. It was layered over motion, held against it. Then there was a pause, not the ordinary pause between bell strikes, not the respectful quiet of a religious place, a different one, intentional, the kind that travels person to person before anyone knows why. The courtyard did not make a sound for 3 full seconds. One woman near the votive tablets lowered her hands before finishing her prayer. A young man in rose sandals turned toward the side chamber without seeming to mean to. Even the pigeons along the roof beam shifted but did not lift. Then the paper screen moved again, not wide. 18 inches, perhaps. Enough for shadow first, and the entire afternoon changed direction. The first thing that entered the courtyard was not a face, it was weight. You could hear it before you could measure it. A change in the way the wooden floor inside the chamber answered pressure. A deeper register, not louder, lower. The boards spoke differently under him, as if they recognized something they had carried before and were preparing to carry again. Then, the screen opened the remaining distance. He stepped through. Height, 6 feet 4 inches. Weight, 312 pounds. Age, 34 years. Training, 21 years in professional sumo, beginning at age 13. His name, though no one said it yet, was Nakamura Kenji. The air shifted around him in a way that did not need explanation. the specific heaviness of someone who has spent decades teaching, gravity to obey him. His shoulders were not simply wide. They were set as if built for impact. The skin across them carried a pale sheen from oil, catching the cold light in uneven reflections. His hair was drawn tight in a topknot, precise, without a strand misplaced. Ritual mattered here. Precision mattered. His feet met the stone just beyond the wood threshold. The sound was not sharp. It was final. A faint tremor moved through the courtyard slabs, not visible, felt, through the thin soles of those standing closest, through the knees, through the small muscles that adjust balance without asking permission. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the ground, not in humility, in calibration. A square of stone, roughly 9 feet across, had been marked with faint chalk lines, almost invisible unless you knew to look. That was the center, the place where the attempts had been measured, where time had been counted, where 200 men had learned something about themselves that they had not intended to learn. The ritual began without announcement. He stepped to the edge of the square and reached down to a low wooden box. Inside, salt, coarse, white. He took a handful and cast it forward. The grains struck the stone with a dry, scattering sound that seemed too small for the man who made it. The smell of mineral and dust rose briefly and disappeared into the colder air. He lifted his right foot, then brought it down. The impact carried, not a strike, a statement. Another 3 seconds passed without sound. A man near the outer wall swallowed, audibly. The woman who had lowered her prayer earlier took one step back without realizing it. A child leaned into his father's leg and stayed there. Nakamura Kenji rolled his shoulders once, slowly, as if reminding them of their range. The movement was controlled to the point of restraint. No wasted motion. The discipline of someone trained. Inside an institution where excess was corrected early and permanently. That institution had begun with his first stable at 13. A room with 8 boys, 4 futons, and a schedule that did not negotiate. Wake at 4:30, sweep, train until the body forgot the difference between strength and pain. Eat last, speak last. Learn that size alone was not power. Structure was power. Ritual was power. Repetition was power. The world in that room made sense because it followed rules that did not change. He had carried those rules through 15 cities, Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka, Tokyo, then further. Smaller towns where the courtyards were narrower and the crowds closer. The record was written not on paper, but in the memory of those who had seen it. 100 challenges. Average survival, 4.7 seconds. Shortest, 2.1. Longest, 9.3. The longest had been a judoka from Sapporo, 5 feet 9 inches, 178 pounds, age 27. He had stepped in with careful footwork, hands low, eyes fixed. He had tried to circle, to use angle instead of resistance. For 3 seconds, it had looked reasonable. At 4, the champion had shifted his weight forward by less than an inch. At 5, the judoka had committed to a grip that never found purchase. At 6, his feet had left the ground. At 7, his back had met stone. At 9.3, he had understood something. He would not describe later. The crowd in Kyoto had heard versions of these numbers before arriving. Numbers travel faster than understanding. They came expecting to witness a limit, to see where it was, to measure themselves against it without stepping inside it. Nakamura did not need to speak. He reached down again. Salt. A second cast. The pow. Grains struck the first layer and spread it wider, cleansing the space, preparing it. The ritual was not superstition. It was structure, a way to enter the same mental place each time, to remove variables, to make the outcome repeatable. He bent, his knees not fully, enough, his center lowered by perhaps 3 inches, the kind of adjustment that changes everything without appearing to. A monk at the far side of the courtyard watched without expression. He had seen fighters before. He had seen strength displayed and removed. He did not move, but his fingers tightened once around the beads at his wrist and then relaxed. Another pause settled. 4 full seconds. The temple held it. The bell did not sound. The city did not intrude. Even the pigeons remained fixed along the beam, their heads angled, as if they understood that movement now would be out of place. Nakamura stepped into the square, and the courtyard, without agreement, gave itself to him. Completely. He did not arrive with the others. There was no moment where attention turned toward the gate, no shift in the crowd that announced a new presence. The courtyard had already been claimed, measured, and settled into a single rhythm, Nakamura's rhythm, when one more figure existed inside it without introduction. Row of votive tablets, left side of the incense basin. 11 feet from the marked square, a man stood reading, height 5 feet 7 inches, weight 138 pounds, clothing, dark civilian jacket, light shirt, narrow trousers, simple shoes with thin soles, no uniform, no signal. The smoke from the incense passed in front of him in slow, uneven lines, briefly softening the outline of his face before clearing again. His posture did not change with the movement. Arms at his sides, shoulders relaxed without collapse. The specific stillness of someone who does not need to display readiness because readiness is already present. You would not look at him first. Not when Nakamura stood in the square, carrying 312 pounds of trained intention. Not when the stone beneath that weight continued to speak in low answers every time he adjusted by an inch. The crowd had already chosen where to place its attention. It had already decided what mattered, and yet one person had not. A man in seat position near the outer wall, though there were no seats, only a habit of standing in rows, had angled himself slightly toward the tablets, mid-30s, hands calloused in a way that did not come from office work. He watched without appearing to. His right hand rested against his left wrist, pressing lightly, as if checking something invisible. He did not look at Nakamura. He looked at the man reading. The courtyard sound returned in fragments. A shoe scuffed, lightly against stone. A sleeve brushed fabric with a dry whisper. Somewhere near the gate, a tourist spoke too loudly, and then stopped when no one answered. Then it settled again. 3 seconds. The man by the tablets turned one page of names. The wood made a faint, controlled click as it met the next panel. His fingers moved with economy. No hesitation, no search. The smell of incense shifted again, carrying a slightly sharper note now. Resin burned a moment too long, and the air felt cooler against the back of the neck as a thin draft came down the corridor from the inner hall. Nakamura lifted his head, not quickly, a gradual change. The line of his gaze rising from the stone to the level of the courtyard, then passing across it without pause. Measuring distance, measuring shape, measuring anything that might interrupt the pattern he had established. His eyes moved past the crowd, then stopped, not on the face, on the stillness. 11 feet from the square, no stance, no signal, no weight shifting in anticipation. The body available, not arranged, which is to say, different. The man at the wall felt it before anyone else. His grip tightened on his own wrist just slightly. The small bones beneath his fingers pressed back. He did not move otherwise, but something in his breathing changed. Slower, shallower, as if preparing to witness something that required space. Nakamura took one step forward inside the square. The sound traveled, not loud, not sharp, but final enough that the nearest observers adjusted their balance without meaning to. The distance between him and the man by the tablets shortened to 9 feet. No one spoke. The courtyard did not make a sound for 4 full seconds. Woman near the incense basin turned her head, following Nakamura's line of sight. She saw the man reading. She saw nothing unusual. She looked back to the square. Her brow held a question she did not form. The man by the tablets closed the panel. Wood, met wood with a soft, exact contact. His hand remained there for a fraction longer than needed, then dropped to his side. His face did not change, calm, direct, carrying nothing that was not necessary. He turned. The movement was small, less than 30 degrees. Enough to place Nakamura within his field of view. No more. The distance between them, 9 feet. The difference between them, 174 pounds. The crowd began to notice, not all at once, in fragments. A pair of students near the back leaned toward each other without speaking. The child by the father shifted his weight, looking from one man to the other, then back again. The monk's beads stopped moving. The air held a different tension now. Not louder, not heavier, narrower, focused between 2 points that had not yet agreed to meet. The man at the wall exhaled once, slowly. He knew. He did not say the name. Names would come later, after understanding, after the sequence had completed and the mind had something to attach the memory to. For now, it was only 2 bodies in one courtyard, one built to take space, one built to remove it. The man by the tablet stepped forward, 1 step, then stillness again. The sole of his shoe met the stone with almost no sound. The damp seams between the slabs accepted the weight without answer. The incense smoke shifted around him and then returned to its vertical lines. Distance, 7 feet. Nakamura adjusted his stance by less than an inch, lower, centered. The crowd felt it as a change in pressure behind the ribs. No announcement followed. No invitation was given, but the square had expanded. Not in size, in meaning. 2 worlds now existed inside it. Nakamura did not step out of the square. He did not need to. The square had already reached the man standing 7 feet away. He raised his right hand once, palm open, then lowered it. Not a greeting, a measurement. Distance confirmed, angle confirmed. The courtyard stones beneath his feet held the imprint of his stance like a memory they had rehearsed. The smell of incense thinned for a moment as a colder draft moved through from the inner hall. It carried the dry scent of old tatami and something metallic beneath it, the kind of smell that comes from bodies training in closed rooms for years. The air touched the back of the neck and stayed there. The man in the dark jacket did not move, arms at his sides. No formal stance. The body available for whatever the next moment required. Nakamura's eyes settled on him fully now. Not curiosity, assessment. He had seen every type that approached this square. The aggressive, the cautious, the respectful, the reckless. One announced himself before stepping in. Weight shifted forward, hands raised, breath changed. The body always spoke first. This one did not, which is to say, he was not speaking yet. The crowd felt the difference without naming it. A student near the back adjusted his footing, then stopped when the sound carried farther than expected. A sleeve brushed fabric. Someone swallowed. The small noises seemed misplaced here, like objects set in the wrong room. 3 seconds passed. No one filled them. Nakamura stepped forward, 1 foot, then the other. The distance closed to 5 feet. His reasoning did not come from impulse. It came from structure, from a system that had been tested across 200 bodies in 15 cities. Control the center. Close distance. Remove options. The opponent becomes a problem of balance. Balance becomes a problem of time. Time, in his experience, did not exceed 9.3 seconds. He would not ask. He would resolve. The man at the wall felt his own pulse in his thumb where it pressed against his wrist. He kept his eyes on the man in the jacket. Not on Nakamura. He had seen weight before. He had not seen this kind of stillness. Nakamura reached, not fast, deliberate. Right arm extending from the shoulder, elbow slightly bent, hand open, fingers prepared to close around cloth or bone or whatever presented itself first. The reach covered 18 inches, enough to enter the space that separated them. The man in the jacket spoke. His voice was low, level, without strain. I respect you. Please, Step back. 8 words, no more. They did not travel far. They did not need to. The sound met Nakamura's reach and stopped there. The courtyard held the sentence. 4 full seconds. No one moved. A woman near the basin turned her head fully now. The child stopped leaning into his father and stood on his own feet. The monks. Fingers resumed 1 bead, then stopped again. Nakamura did not withdraw his hand. He adjusted, 1 inch forward. The logic remained intact. A warning was information. Information did not alter the structure. Control the center, close distance, remove options. He spoke for the first time. 2 words. Step forward. Not a request. A directive that had worked before because it had always been obeyed. Not by agreement. By physics. The man in the jacket did not respond to the words. He responded to the distance. His weight shifted by less than 1 inch. Not backward, not forward. Down. A settling. As if the ground beneath him had accepted him differently. The man at the wall exhaled again, slower this time. He knew what the others did not. Nakamura's hand closed the remaining space. 4 feet, then 3. The fingers were 6 inches from. Contact. The man in the jacket spoke again. This is your last chance. 6 words. Final. No change in tone. No increase in volume. The sentence ended and did not echo. The courtyard did not make a sound for 5 full seconds. The bell did not strike. The city did not intrude. Even the incense smoke seemed to hold its vertical line without disturbance. You could feel the temperature drop by a degree in that space. Nakamura completed the reach. Contact, cloth at the shoulder. A firm grip. The kind that had ended 200 attempts before they had time to become anything else. His thumb pressed into fabric. His fingers closed behind it. The structure was in place. The sequence had begun. The crowd held its breath. The man at the wall tightened his grip until the knuckles of his right hand went pale. He did not look away. No one did. The last moment before everything changes does not announce itself. It arrives, and then it is already gone. The sequence began the moment. The grip settled. Right hand of Nakamura Kenji. Fingers closed across the left shoulder of the jacket. Thumb pressing forward. Palm sealing the contact point. Force direction. Inward and down. Standard entry. Control the upper frame. Collapse balance. Drive through the center. This was the pattern that had ended 200 attempts. The first second started. You could hear the fabric stretch. A dry, tight sound. Threads taking load. The smell of cloth warmed by friction rose faintly beneath the incense. The stone under Nakamura's lead foot accepted a forward shift of weight, approximately 70 pounds transferred in less than half a second. Every previous challenger had done one of 3 things here. They resisted, pushing back into the grip, feeding the forward force, giving Nakamura the structure he required. They retreated, stepping back, surrendering center, allowing the drive to become a fall. Or they froze, waiting for a second grip that never needed to come. No one had tried the 4th option. At 0.6 seconds, the man in the jacket moved. Not away, not into a cross, 18 inches to the left. His left foot slid along the seam between the stones, using the damp line as a guide. No lift, no sound. The motion removed his center from the line of force without breaking contact, which is to say, the grip no longer held what it intended to hold. At 1.2 seconds, his right shoulder rotated backward by perhaps 4 inches. Not a turn, a withdrawal of a single point. The cloth under Nakamura's finger shifted. The pressure he expected met less resistance than required. His hand closed on something that was no longer there in the same way. At 1.8 seconds, the man's right hand rose, not to strike, to place. 2 fingers touched the inside of Nakamura's forearm, just below the elbow. Contact was light, exact, the kind of touch used to locate, not to force. The direction changed, not the grip, the body holding it. At 2.4 seconds, Nakamura's forward drive continued. It had to. 312 pounds in motion does not stop. Because intention changes. The structure he had built over 21 years did what it had been trained to do. It committed, but the line it followed had been moved. His center passed the point it intended to occupy by less than 3 inches, which is to say, enough. At 3.1 seconds, his right foot attempted to correct. Heel pressed down, toes adjusted. The stone answered with less friction than expected where the damp seam crossed the square. A half-inch slip, not visible. Felt. The man in the jacket did not increase force. He removed the need for it. At 3.8 seconds, Nakamura's grip tightened. Reflex. Compensation. The fingers closed harder on the jacket. The fabric pulled. The body attached to it was no longer aligned with the pull. At 4.5 seconds, the man's left hand rose. Palm open. It met Nakamura's chest. Not with impact, with placement. 2 inches below the collarbone. Center line. The contact. Did not push. It redirected what was already moving. You feel the wind. You feel the ground shift, but you are untouched. At 5.2 seconds, Nakamura's knees bent, not by choice, by consequence. The structure that held his balance had been asked to support weight in a direction it had not been built to support. The adjustment came too late. At 5.6 seconds, his breath left. A short, involuntary release, audible in the quiet, the kind that follows a missed step more than a strike. At exactly 6.0 seconds, his right knee touched the stone. The sound was small. Final. His left foot remained planted. His right hand still held the jacket. But the position had changed. The center was no longer his. The sequence ended. 6 seconds. Exactly 6. The courtyard did not make a sound for 4 full seconds. No one moved. The incense smoke resumed its upward lines as if nothing had interrupted it. The bell did not strike. The city below continued without adjustment. Nakamura remained where he had arrived. 1 knee on stone, 1 foot grounded, hand closed on cloth that no longer served its purpose. The man in the dark jacket stood exactly where he had been. Arms at his sides again, expression unchanged, the same calm, the same directness, carrying nothing that was not necessary. The distance between them had not increased. Only the meaning of it had. A woman near the basin covered her mouth with her hand and did not realize she had done it. The child took 1 step forward, then stopped when his father's hand found his shoulder. The man at the wall released his grip on his wrist and flexed his fingers once, slowly. Sound returned in fragments. A shoe shifted. A breath entered and left. Fabric moved against itself. Then the courtyard remembered how to exist again. Nakamura did not fall further. He stayed where the sequence had placed him. Right knee on stone, left foot grounded, hand still closed on the fabric of the jacket, though the grip had already lost its function. The pressure in his fingers reduced without instruction, not weakness, recalibration. The stone beneath his knee held the warmth of contact. You could see the faint darkening where moisture and heat met. The smell of incense returned fully now, threading back into the space that had been held empty for 6 seconds. Beneath it, there was the clearer scent of exertion. Not sweat, not yet, but the early metallic note of breath that had been forced out too quickly. He looked down. Not in defeat, in verification. His right foot adjusted by 1/2 inch, finding a more stable line along the seam between the stones. His left hand, which had not been used, rested against his thigh with the same control it had held before. The body was still his. That had not changed. What had changed was the equation he had trusted. Control the center, close distance, remove. Options. He had done all 3. The result had not followed, which is to say, there was a 4th condition he had not accounted for. He released the jacket. The fabric fell back into its original line with a soft, exact sound. No tear, no distortion. The object left behind was untouched. He placed his right foot fully on the ground and rose. The motion was slower than his entry, but not hesitant. 34 years of trained balance reasserted themselves through the same pathways that had been interrupted. His spine straightened, his shoulders set. The ritual posture returned, but it carried a difference now. Less certainty. More information. The courtyard watched. No one spoke. 3 seconds passed. The man in the dark jacket did not step back. He did not step forward. He remained where he had been at the beginning, arms at his sides, the same stillness occupying the same amount of space. Nakamura faced him, distance, 5 feet. He bowed, not deeply, not ceremonially, a controlled incline of the head and upper body that acknowledged something precise. Not the man, the correction. When he spoke, the voice held no strain. "Show me again." 3 words. The request was not for repetition. It was for understanding. The man in the jacket shook his head once. Small. Final. No need. 2 words. Nothing more. The sentence did not dismiss. It concluded. A monk stepped forward from the far side of the courtyard. Age, approximately 62. Robe worn at the edges where hands had found it over years. His sandals made almost no sound on the stone. He stopped at the boundary of the square and looked at both men in turn, reading the space as one reads a text already familiar. His voice entered the courtyard with the same weight as the bell had earlier. Enough. 1 word, not loud, not negotiable. The authority did not come from volume. It came from placement, from timing, from a life spent recognizing when a sequence had completed itself. Nakamura inclined his head again, this time toward the monk. The ritual reassembled around him without resistance. He stepped back from the square, the same way he had entered it, but with a different measure in his stride. The stone accepted his weight and answered it as before. The body had not diminished. The structure had expanded. The man in the dark jacket turned. No acknowledgement. No pause. He walked past the incense basin, the smoke parting briefly around him, and then closing. His steps made almost no sound. The damp seams between the stones took his weight and gave nothing back. He passed the line of votive tablets, the wooden panels reflecting a thin band of pale light along their edges. The man at the wall watched him go. He did not speak. He did not follow. He would tell this story later. Not immediately. Not with the crowd. Years would pass before the details settled into the exact order they required. He would remember the numbers, the distances, the seconds. He would remember the smell of incense and the feel of the stone through his shoes. He would remember the moment. The line of force moved without force. He would tell it for the rest of his life. Outside the temple, the city continued. 26 in the afternoon now. A streetcar passed beneath the incline with a hollow metallic ring. A vendor called out the price of chestnuts to no one in particular. 2 men argued about directions near the station. The sky held the same pale silver light. Nothing in Kyoto, adjusted to what had occurred 8 minutes above it. Inside the courtyard, the square remained marked. The chalk lines had not changed. The salt lay where it had fallen. The space held no memory that could be seen. Nakamura stood at the edge and looked at it once more. Not measuring, not claiming, recognizing. Then he turned and followed the path along the inner wall, disappearing through the same paper screen from which he had entered. The wood met wood with a soft, exact contact. The courtyard resumed its earlier rhythm. Visitors returned to their paths. The woman at the basin completed her prayer. The child asked a question and received no answer he could use. The monk resumed, his beads. The man in the dark jacket reached the outer gate. He did not look back. The distance he had crossed was 5 feet. The time it had taken was 6 seconds. The largest correction Nakamura had ever experienced, in the smallest space, without going anywhere at all.